The Texas sun blazed mercilessly over the Lone Star Ranch as Jake Thornton adjusted his worn leather hat and squinted across the sprawling pasture. 28 years old and foreman of one of the largest cattle operations in the state, Jake had earned his position through grit, determination, and an almost supernatural understanding of both horses and cattle. His weathered hands, scarred from years of rope work and fence mending, gripped the reins of his stallion Thunder as he surveyed the land that had become his life's work. The ranch stretched for thousands of acres, a testament to 3 generations of Thornton sweat and sacrifice, and Jake wore the responsibility like a second skin. His deep blue eyes, the color of storm clouds gathering on the horizon, held the weight of tradition and the burden of maintaining his family's legacy in an increasingly modern world that seemed to have little patience for cowboy ways. The morning had started like any other, with Jake rising before dawn to check the fence lines and ensure the cattle were safely grazing in the designated pastures. The routine was as familiar to him as breathing. Mount up, ride out, check the herd, mend what was broken, and prepare for another day of honest work under the endless Texas sky. But something felt different today, an electricity in the air that spoke of change coming whether he wanted it or not. As he rode along the property line that separated Thornton land from the neighboring Blackwood Ranch, Jake's jaw tightened automatically. The Blackwood name had been synonymous with trouble for the Thornton family for over 30 years, ever since the water rights dispute that had torn the two families apart and turned former friends into bitter enemies. The feud had started over access to Willow Creek, the life-giving water source that ran between both properties, and had escalated into a full-scale war of pride, principle, and pure stubborn hatred that had consumed 2 generations. Jake's father, Samuel Thornton, had instilled in him from childhood that Blackwoods were not to be trusted, that they were greedy land grabbers who would stop at nothing to steal what rightfully belonged to the Thorntons. The animosity ran so deep that Jake had never even spoken to a member of the Blackwood family, despite their properties sharing a boundary line that stretched for miles. It was Thunder who first sensed the approaching vehicle, his ears pricking forward and his powerful body tensing beneath Jake's experienced seat. The cowboy's attention was drawn to a cloud of dust rising from the county road that led toward town, and as the vehicle drew closer, Jake could make out the sleek lines of an expensive sports car, completely out of place in this rugged landscape of cattle and cowboys. The car slowed as it approached the ranch entrance, and Jake found himself urging Thunder closer to get a better look at whoever was brave enough or foolish enough to venture onto Thornton property in such an impractical vehicle. What he saw when the car stopped and the driver's door opened made him question whether the Texas heat was playing tricks on his mind. A woman stepped out of the car, and she was unlike anyone Jake had ever seen in these parts. She was tall and elegant, with long auburn hair that caught the sunlight like spun copper, and she wore clothes that probably cost more than most ranch hands made in a month. But it wasn't her obvious wealth or sophisticated appearance that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was the way she moved, with a confidence and grace that suggested she was completely comfortable in her own skin, regardless of the unfamiliar surroundings. She looked around the ranch with curious eyes, taking in the corrals, the barn, and the vast expanse of grazing land with what appeared to be genuine interest, rather than the disdain he might have expected from someone who clearly came from a different world. As she walked toward the ranch house, Jake found himself studying her profile, noting the determined set of her jaw and the intelligent spark in her green eyes that suggested she was not just another wealthy tourist looking for an authentic Western experience. There was something about her that drew him in despite his better judgment, a magnetism that he felt from hundreds of yards away that made him want to know more about this mysterious woman who had appeared like a mirage in his structured, predictable world. It was only when she knocked on the front door of the ranch house and was greeted by his father that Jake realized who she must be. The conversation between Samuel Thornton and the mysterious woman was too far away for Jake to hear, but he could read his father's body language like a book. The older man's shoulders tensed, his posture became rigid and defensive, and even from a distance Jake could see the thundercloud of anger gathering on Samuel's weathered face. The conversation was brief and clearly not pleasant, ending with Samuel pointing toward the county road in an unmistakable gesture of dismissal. As the woman walked back to her car, She turned and looked directly at Jake, as if she had known he was watching all along. Their eyes met across the distance, and Jake felt something electric pass between them, a connection that defied explanation and left him feeling unsettled and exhilarated at the same time. She held his gaze for a long moment, and he saw something in her expression that looked almost like a challenge, as if she was daring him to be different from what she expected. When she finally got back in her car and drove away, leaving nothing but dust and the lingering scent of expensive perfume, Jake remained motionless on Thunder's back, staring at the empty road and trying to make sense of what had just happened. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table in the ranch house's kitchen, Jake learned the identity of the mysterious visitor. Samuel Thornton's face was still dark with anger as he recounted the events of the afternoon to his wife, Martha, and his younger son, Tommy. The woman was Victoria Blackwood, daughter of their enemy, Edmund Blackwood, and she had come to the ranch with what Samuel described as a ridiculous proposal for ending the feud between the families. According to Samuel, Victoria had suggested that the two families meet to discuss a compromise regarding the water rights, possibly even exploring the idea of sharing access to Willow Creek in a way that would benefit both ranches. The very suggestion had infuriated Samuel, who saw it as yet another Blackwood attempt to gain access to Thornton resources through trickery and manipulation. 3 days passed before Jake saw Victoria Blackwood again, but she had never truly left his thoughts. Her image seemed burned into his memory, the way the sunlight had caught the copper highlights in her hair, the challenge in her green eyes, and most of all, the way she had looked at him across the distance with an intensity that suggested she had seen something in him that even he didn't fully understand. He found himself riding the fence line between the two properties more often than necessary, telling himself he was just being thorough in his duties as foreman, but knowing deep down that he was hoping for another glimpse of the woman who had shaken his carefully ordered world. The opportunity came on a Thursday morning when Jake was checking water levels at the disputed section of Willow Creek. The creek ran clear and cold through this part of both ranches, its banks lined with ancient willow trees that provided blessed shade from the relentless Texas sun. This was the heart of the conflict between the families, the source of life-giving water that both ranches needed to survive and prosper. As Jake knelt by the water's edge, testing the flow and checking for any signs of contamination or blockage, he heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats approaching from the Blackwood side of the creek. He looked up to see Victoria Blackwood riding toward him on a magnificent black mare, her long hair flowing behind her like a banner in the morning breeze. She rode with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time in the saddle, her posture straight and her hands gentle but firm on the reins. She wore practical ranch clothes today, fitted jeans, boots, and a white cotton shirt that somehow managed to look both functional and elegant on her tall frame. Jake found himself standing slowly, his heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with the woman approaching him across the forbidden boundary between their families' lands. Victoria brought her mare to a stop on the opposite bank of the creek, creating a barrier of running water between them that felt both protective and symbolic. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, each studying the other with undisguised curiosity and something deeper that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The morning air was filled with the sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, the gentle babble of the creek, and the whisper of wind through the willow branches. But Jake felt as if he and Victoria were alone in the world, connected by an invisible thread that transcended family loyalty and ancient feuds. "You must be Jake Thornton," Victoria said finally, her voice carrying easily across the water. It was a rich, warm sound, with just a hint of the sophisticated Eastern education that Jake had heard rumors about. "I'm Victoria Blackwood, though I suspect you've already figured that out." Her words carried no malice or challenge, just a straightforward honesty that Jake found refreshing after years of dealing with the politics and posturing that seemed to dominate every interaction between their families. "I figured as much," Jake replied, his own voice rougher than he intended, made gravelly by surprise and an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Your father probably told you to stay away from Thornton land." He found himself studying her face as he spoke, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the stubborn set of her jaw that suggested she was not easily intimidated or controlled. Victoria laughed, a sound like silver bells that seemed to lighten the heavy atmosphere of conflict that had hung over this place for so many years. "My father tells me to do a lot of things," she said, dismounting from her mare with fluid grace and leading the horse to the water's edge to drink. "I've never been particularly good at following orders, especially when they don't make sense to me." Her admission surprised Jake, who had grown up believing that Blackwoods were a unified front of greed and manipulation. The idea that Victoria might think independently, might even disagree with her family's position, opened up possibilities that Jake wasn't sure he was ready to explore. "And staying away from Thornton's doesn't make sense to you?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral, even as he felt himself being drawn into a conversation that he knew was dangerous territory. Victoria looked directly at him, her green eyes serious and searching. "Hating people I've never met because of something that happened before I was born," she said. "No, that doesn't make much sense to me at all." Her words hung in the air between them, like a challenge to everything Jake had been taught, everything he had believed about the nature of the conflict between their families. He found himself questioning, perhaps for the first time, whether the hatred that had defined his family's relationship with the Blackwoods was justified, or whether it had simply become a habit too ingrained to break. "Your grandfather stole our water rights," Jake said. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt like something he was reciting rather than something he truly believed. The passion and conviction that usually fueled his anger toward the Blackwood family was notably absent, replaced by curiosity about the woman standing across the creek from him. Victoria nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response. "That's what your family says," she acknowledged. "My family tells a different story. They say your grandfather tried to claim exclusive rights to water that had always been shared, and that we were just protecting our legitimate interests." She paused, studying Jake's reaction before continuing. "But here's what I think. I think both our grandfathers were stubborn old men who let their pride get in the way of common sense, and now their grandchildren are paying the price for their inability to compromise." The simple honesty of her assessment cut through years of family rhetoric and bitter accusations like a knife through butter. Jake found himself nodding almost involuntarily, recognizing the truth in what she was saying, even as part of his mind rebelled against the idea of agreeing with a Blackwood about anything. "Maybe," he said carefully, "but that doesn't change the fact that our families have been enemies for 3 decades. Some things can't be undone just because we wish they could be." Victoria stepped closer to the creek, close enough that Jake could see the golden flecks in her green eyes and smell the faint scent of wildflowers that seemed to cling to her hair. "Can't they?" she asked softly. "What if 2 people decided to write a different story? What if they chose to see possibility instead of impossibility?" The conversation by Willow Creek marked the beginning of something that Jake couldn't quite name but couldn't forget. Over the next 2 weeks, he found himself returning to that spot every morning, telling himself he was just checking the water levels, but knowing he was hoping to see Victoria again. She seemed to understand his unspoken invitation, appearing across the creek with increasing regularity, and their conversations gradually evolved from careful verbal sparring to something approaching genuine friendship. They talked about everything except the obvious, the impossibility of their situation, the families that would never understand, and the growing attraction that hummed between them like electricity before a storm. Instead, they discussed the ranch life they both loved, sharing stories about difficult horses and stubborn cattle, comparing notes on the challenges of maintaining operations in an increasingly corporate agricultural world. Jake discovered that Victoria was not the pampered rich girl he had expected, but rather a woman who had earned an MBA from Harvard before returning to Texas to help modernize her family's ranching operations. She spoke passionately about sustainable grazing practices, water conservation, and the importance of maintaining the cowboy way of life while adapting to modern economic realities. Her intelligence and genuine love for the land impressed Jake more than he cared to admit, forcing him to reevaluate his assumptions about the Blackwood family and their motivations. Victoria, for her part, found herself drawn to Jake's quiet strength and deep connection to the land. Unlike the men she had known in Boston and New York, smooth-talking executives who saw ranching as a quaint hobby rather than a way of life, Jake possessed an authenticity that she found both refreshing and irresistibly attractive. He spoke with reverence about the cattle in his care, the horses that had become his partners, and the land that sustained them all. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of hard work, told stories of dedication and sacrifice that no amount of formal education could teach. Their morning meetings by the creek became the highlight of both their days, brief interludes of honesty and connection in lives otherwise dominated by family expectations and ancient grudges. They were careful to arrive and leave separately, and neither mentioned their encounters to anyone else, understanding instinctively that what was growing between them was fragile and would not survive the harsh light of family scrutiny. The secrecy added an element of excitement and danger that made every stolen moment feel precious and intense. 3 weeks after their first conversation, Victoria made a suggestion that would change everything. "There's a place I want to show you," she said as they stood on opposite sides of the creek, their horses grazing peacefully nearby. "It's on neutral ground, not Thornton land, not Blackwood land. Would you meet me there tonight?" Jake's pulse quickened at the suggestion, recognizing the implicit invitation for what it was, a chance to be together without the symbolic barrier of the creek between them, without the constant reminder of their family's enmity. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings about the danger of such a meeting, but his heart was already answering for him. "Where?" he asked simply. Victoria smiled, the first truly unguarded expression he had seen from her, and the radiance of it nearly took his breath away. "The old Miller place," she said. "It's been abandoned for years, but there's a gazebo by their pond that's still intact. 8 o'clock. The Miller Ranch had been abandoned for over a decade, its owners having moved to the city after failing to make the operation profitable in an increasingly difficult market. The property sat between the Thornton and Blackwood ranches like a no-man's land, belonging to a bank now and slowly being reclaimed by the Texas wilderness. Jake knew the place well. He had helped with the cattle roundup when the Millers finally gave up, and he had often ridden through the area when checking the far boundaries of Thornton land. That evening, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jake found himself standing before his bedroom mirror, trying to decide what to wear to meet a woman who was supposed to be his enemy. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, 28 years old and acting like a teenager preparing for his first date. He finally settled on his best jeans and a clean white shirt, adding his good boots and the silver belt buckle his grandfather had given him. As he rode thunder through the gathering dusk toward the abandoned Miller place, Jake's mind raced with possibilities and concerns. What did Victoria want from this meeting? Was she simply curious about the forbidden attraction between them, or was there something deeper driving her desire to see him away from the watchful boundaries of their family lands? More importantly, what did he want from this encounter? The questions multiplied as he approached the gazebo, but they all faded into insignificance when he saw Victoria waiting for him in the gathering twilight. She had arrived before him and was standing by the pond, her silhouette graceful and mysterious against the darkening sky. She had traded her usual ranch clothes for a flowing sundress the color of Texas bluebonnets, and her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the last rays of sunlight like fire. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was warm and welcoming, tinged with the same nervous anticipation that Jake felt coursing through his own veins. "You came," she said softly, as if she hadn't been entirely sure he would. "I wasn't sure you would," Jake admitted, dismounting from Thunder and securing the horse's reins to a nearby tree. The admission felt dangerous, revealing as it did his own uncertainty about what was happening between them. Victoria walked toward him, each step deliberate and graceful, until she was close enough that he could see the golden flecks in her green eyes and smell the subtle perfume that had haunted his dreams for weeks. "I've been thinking about you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The simple honesty of the statement hit Jake like a physical blow, confirming what he had hoped and feared in equal measure. "Victoria," he began, but she placed a finger gently against his lips, silencing his protests before they could form. The gazebo stood like a testament to better times, its white-painted wood weathered but still elegant, against the backdrop of the abandoned Miller Pond. Spanish moss hung from the ancient oak trees that surrounded the small structure, creating a natural curtain that seemed to separate this place from the rest of the world and all its complications. Jake and Victoria stood facing each other in the center of the gazebo, the space between them charged with weeks of unspoken longing and the weight of everything they knew they shouldn't be feeling. The last light of day painted everything in shades of gold and amber, making Victoria's hair shimmer like spun copper and casting Jake's rugged features in warm, romantic shadows that softened the hard lines of his weathered face. "We shouldn't be here," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes never left Victoria's face as he spoke the words he knew he should mean but didn't. "We shouldn't be feeling what we're feeling, and we sure as hell shouldn't be meeting in secret like this." His hands hung at his sides, clenched into fists as he fought the urge to reach out and touch her, to discover if her skin was as soft as it looked in the fading light. Victoria moved closer, close enough that Jake could feel the warmth radiating from her body and catch the scent of wildflowers that seemed to be her signature fragrance. "Shouldn't we?" she asked, her voice soft but challenging. "Says who? My father. Your father. Men who have been nursing a grudge for 30 years and can't even remember why it started." She reached out tentatively, her fingertips barely grazing the back of Jake's hand, but the contact sent electricity shooting up his arm and straight to his heart. "What if they're wrong, Jake? What if this hatred between our families is just a waste of time and energy that's keeping us from something beautiful?" The question hung between them like a bridge that they could either cross or burn, and Jake found himself teetering on the edge of a decision that would change everything. He had spent his entire life following the rules set down by his father and grandfather, accepting without question the idea that Blackwoods were the enemy and that any contact with them was a betrayal of everything the Thornton family stood for. But standing here in the gathering dusk with Victoria's hand touching his, all of that seemed like ancient history that had nothing to do with the present moment and the connection he felt growing stronger between them with every passing second. "How you don't know what you're asking," Jake said, but his resistance was crumbling like an old fence in a strong wind. "My family. Your family. They would never understand this. They would never accept it. We're talking about generations of hatred, Victoria. That's not something you can just wish away because you're feeling something you think might be love." The word slipped out before Jake could stop it, hanging in the air between them like a confession that changed everything. Victoria's eyes widened at his admission, and Jake saw something kindle in their green depths that looked like hope mixed with triumph. She had suspected what he was feeling, had recognized it because she was feeling the same thing herself. But hearing him say it, or almost say it, made it real in a way that transformed the very air around them. "Love," Victoria repeated softly, as if testing the weight and sound of the word. "Is that what this is? This feeling that makes me think about you every morning when I wake up and every night before I fall asleep? This need to see you that's stronger than family loyalty or common sense?" She stepped even closer, close enough now that Jake could see the pulse beating rapidly at the base of her throat and feel her breath warm against his chest. "Because if that's love, then I've been feeling it since the first moment I saw you sitting on that horse, watching me like you were trying to solve a puzzle." Jake's resolve finally shattered completely, and he reached up to cup Victoria's face in his hands, his calloused palms rough against her smooth skin but infinitely gentle. "Victoria," he whispered, her name a prayer and a promise and a plea for forgiveness, all rolled into one. "This is crazy. We're crazy. But I can't stop thinking about you either, and I can't keep pretending that this is just curiosity or rebellion or any of the rational explanations I've been trying to come up with." Their first kiss was inevitable, a collision of longing and need that had been building for weeks and could no longer be denied or delayed. Jake's lips found Victoria's in the fading light of the gazebo, and the world around them disappeared into insignificance. The kiss was tender at first, almost hesitant, as if they were both afraid that too much passion too quickly might shatter the fragile magic of the moment. But tenderness quickly gave way to hunger as weeks of suppressed desire finally found expression, and they kissed with the desperate intensity of two people who knew they were stealing time from a world that would never approve of what they were feeling. When they finally broke apart, Both were breathing hard, and Jake rested his forehead against Victoria's, his eyes closed as he tried to process what had just happened and what it meant for both of their futures. "Now what?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion and the aftermath of a kiss that had changed everything between them. "Now we figure out how to love each other in a world that's determined to keep us apart," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the tears that sparkled in her eyes. "And we decide whether what we're feeling is strong enough to fight for, even if it means going against everything our families expect from us." They spent the next hour in the gazebo, talking and planning and dreaming about possibilities that seemed both wonderful and terrifying. They made plans to continue meeting in secret, to explore what was growing between them while they figured out how to handle the inevitable confrontation with their families. Jake felt like a man awakening from a long sleep, suddenly aware of possibilities he had never considered and feelings he had never experienced. As they prepared to return to their separate worlds and the lies they would have to tell to protect their secret, Victoria caught Jake's hand and pulled him back for one more kiss, this one soft and sweet and full of promise. "Whatever happens," she whispered against his lips, "whatever our families do when they find out about this, I want you to know that tonight was worth every bit of trouble that's coming our way." Jake held her close, breathing in her scent and memorizing the feel of her in his arms, knowing that everything had changed and that there would be no going back to the simple hatred and clear boundaries that had defined his world for 28 years. The weeks that followed their first kiss at the Miller gazebo became a delicate dance of stolen moments and carefully constructed alibis. Jake and Victoria developed an intricate system of secret meetings, using old ranch roads and abandoned buildings to find time together, away from the watchful eyes of their families and the ranch hands who might report back to their fathers. They met in the early morning hours before the ranch work began, in the late evenings after the cattle were settled for the night, and sometimes during the heat of midday when everyone else sought shelter from the brutal Texas sun. Each encounter was precious and dangerous, charged with the electricity of forbidden love and the constant awareness that discovery would mean the end of everything they were building together. Jake found himself living two completely different lives. By day, he was the dutiful son and responsible foreman, maintaining the facade of normalcy, while his thoughts constantly drifted to Victoria and the next time he would see her. He became an expert at deflecting his father's questions about his whereabouts and his younger brother's observations about his distracted state. Samuel Thornton had noticed his eldest son's unusual behavior, but attributed it to the stress of running such a large operation, never suspecting that Jake's heart was occupied by the daughter of his worst enemy. During their secret meetings, Jake discovered layers to Victoria that continued to surprise and delight him. Behind her sophisticated exterior and Eastern education was a woman who could laugh at herself, who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty helping with ranch work, and who possessed a fierce intelligence that challenged Jake to think beyond the boundaries that had always defined his world. She told him about her years in Boston, studying business and learning about corporate finance, but also about her homesickness for Texas and her growing conviction that her future lay in ranching rather than in boardrooms and high-rise offices. Victoria, in turn, was captivated by Jake's deep connection to the land and his intuitive understanding of the animals in his care. She watched him work with difficult horses and stubborn cattle, marveling at his patience and skill, and she found herself falling not just for his rugged handsomeness, but for the gentleness and wisdom that guided his interactions with the world around him. He taught her things about ranching that no business school could have covered, how to read the weather in the behavior of cattle, how to spot illness in a horse before obvious symptoms appeared, and how to move through the natural world as a partner rather than a conqueror. Their love affair unfolded against the backdrop of the changing seasons, each meeting place becoming associated with specific memories and milestones in their relationship. The old line shack on the far edge of Thornton property, where they sheltered during an unexpected thunderstorm, holding each other close while lightning split the sky and rain drummed on the tin roof. The hidden grove of mesquite trees, where Victoria first told Jake she loved him. The words tumbling out during a sunset ride that had turned into something deeper and more meaningful than either had planned. The abandoned windmill where Jake carved their initials into the weathered wood, creating a secret monument to a love that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. As summer gave way to fall, their relationship deepened beyond physical attraction into something that felt permanent and unbreakable. They talked about the future in whispered conversations, dreaming of a time when their family's feud would be nothing but an unpleasant memory, and they could love each other openly. Victoria spoke of modernizing ranching practices that could benefit both families, creating a partnership that would make both operations more profitable and sustainable. Jake found himself imagining a life where the artificial boundaries between their lands meant nothing, where their children could grow up knowing both grandfathers and inheriting the best traditions of both families. But their secret couldn't remain hidden forever, and the constant stress of deception began to take its toll on both of them. Jake struggled with the guilt of lying to his family, especially his father, who had always trusted him completely and relied on his honesty in all ranch matters. The elaborate cover stories and careful timing required for their meetings left Jake exhausted and nervous, jumping at unexpected sounds and constantly looking over his shoulder. Victoria faced similar challenges, deflecting her father's questions about her frequent absences and her obvious distraction during family discussions about ranch business. Edmund Blackwood had begun to notice his daughter's secretive behavior and her reluctance to engage in the family's traditional complaints about the Thorntons, but he attributed her changing attitude to her desire to modernize their approach to the ongoing conflict rather than to any personal involvement with the enemy family. The pressure of maintaining their secret intensified when both families began planning their traditional separate celebrations for the annual Cattle Barons Ball, the biggest social event in the county. For generations, the Thorntons and Blackwoods had attended the same event but maintained careful distance, acknowledging each other with cold nods and otherwise pretending the other family didn't exist. This year, both Jake and Victoria would be expected to attend with their families, to smile and socialize and maintain the public facade of family unity while keeping their personal feelings completely hidden. The thought of being in the same room with Victoria, but unable to acknowledge their relationship, of watching her dance with other men while he pretended indifference, filled Jake with a mixture of longing and dread that made the approaching event feel more like a trial than a celebration. 3 days before the ball, during one of their evening meetings at the old Miller gazebo, Victoria brought up a possibility that both excited and terrified Jake. "What if we told them?" she asked, her voice quiet but determined, as they sat together watching the stars emerge in the clear Texas sky. "What if we stopped hiding and just faced whatever comes next? We can't keep living like this forever, Jake. Sooner or later, someone is going to see us together, or one of us is going to make a mistake, and then we'll have to deal with our family's reactions anyway. At least if we tell them ourselves, we maintain some control over the situation." Jake felt his stomach drop at the suggestion, even though part of him had been thinking the same thing for weeks. "Victoria, you don't understand what you're asking," he said, taking her hands in his and feeling their slight tremor, whether from cold or nerves he couldn't tell. "My father would disown me. Your father would probably challenge me to some kind of duel. This feud has defined both our families for so long that I'm not sure they remember how to exist without it. Taking that away from them, loving each other, it might destroy more than just our relationship, it might destroy our families entirely." The inevitable discovery came not through carelessness or bad luck, but through the sharp eyes and suspicious nature of Tommy Thornton, Jake's 24-year-old brother. Tommy had always lived in Jake's shadow, watching his older brother effortlessly command respect from ranch hands and cattle alike, while he struggled to find his own place in the family operation. Where Jake was calm and patient, Tommy was hot-headed and impulsive. Where Jake could gentle a wild horse with quiet words and steady hands, Tommy relied on force and dominance, often making situations worse rather than better. The dynamic between the brothers had been manageable when they were younger, but as they grew into men, Tommy's resentment of Jake's position as heir apparent and natural leader had begun to fester into something darker and more dangerous. Tommy had noticed Jake's recent distracted behavior and frequent absences, and his competitive nature made him determined to discover what was occupying his brother's attention so completely. He began following Jake at a discreet distance, using skills learned during childhood games of cowboys and Indians to track his brother's movements without being detected. For several days, Tommy's surveillance yielded nothing more interesting than Jake's tendency to take longer routes when checking cattle, and his habit of stopping to stare thoughtfully across the landscape, as if seeing something that wasn't there. But Tommy was persistent, and his patience was finally rewarded on a Thursday evening when Jake rode out toward the Miller place instead of returning home for dinner. Tommy followed at a careful distance, his heart racing with the anticipation of finally solving the mystery of his brother's strange behavior. What he discovered at the old gazebo by the Miller pond exceeded his wildest expectations and filled him with a mixture of shock, anger, and twisted satisfaction. Hidden in the cover of mesquite brush, Tommy watched in disbelief as Jake embraced and kissed Victoria Blackwood with a passion that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The sight of his brother, the golden son, the responsible one, the man their father trusted above all others, locked in a romantic embrace with the daughter of their family's worst enemy, was both devastating and exhilarating. Devastating because it confirmed Tommy's growing suspicion that Jake was not the perfect son and brother he appeared to be, but exhilarating because it gave Tommy ammunition that could finally shift the balance of power within the Thornton family. Tommy remained hidden until Jake and Victoria parted ways, his mind racing with possibilities and plans. He could confront Jake directly, demanding explanations and using the secret to gain leverage over his brother. He could go straight to their father, earning points for loyalty while destroying Jake's standing in the family. Or he could wait and watch, gathering more evidence and choosing his moment for maximum impact. The decision was complicated by Tommy's own complicated feelings about the family feud. Unlike Jake, who had been groomed from childhood to eventually take over ranch operations, Tommy had spent more time in town making friends and connections that crossed family lines. He had never felt the deep personal animosity toward the Blackwoods that seemed to drive his father, and he had often wondered privately whether the feud was more trouble than it was worth. But personal feelings aside, Tommy recognized the value of information and the power that came from holding secrets that could destroy lives and relationships. That night, Tommy lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with the implications of what he had seen. Part of him was genuinely concerned about the danger Jake was courting, both for himself and for the family. If word of Jake's relationship with Victoria Blackwood became public knowledge, it would humiliate Samuel Thornton and potentially damage the ranch's reputation in a community where family honor and loyalty were still valued above almost everything else. But another part of Tommy was thrilled by the possibility of finally having something over his perfect older brother, something that could level the playing field between them and force their father to see that Jake was not infallible. The next morning, Tommy made his decision. Instead of immediately revealing what he knew, he chose to confront Jake directly, hoping to either talk sense into his brother or gain some advantage from the situation. He found Jake in the barn, preparing for the day's work with his usual methodical efficiency, and the sight of his brother acting so normally while harboring such an explosive secret filled Tommy with renewed anger. "We need to talk," Tommy said without preamble, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Privately." Jake looked up from the saddle he was adjusting, immediately sensing the tension in his brother's voice and posture. "About what?" he asked, though something in Tommy's expression made his stomach clench with premonition. "About Victoria Blackwood," Tommy said, and he had the satisfaction of seeing Jake's face go pale beneath his tan. "About what you were doing with her at the Miller place last night, and about what Dad's going to say when he finds out his precious eldest son has been fraternizing with the enemy." The words hit Jake like physical blows, confirming his worst fears about discovery, while simultaneously filling him with a protective rage toward Victoria. "How long have you been following me?" Jake asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Tommy shrugged, trying to appear casual despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Long enough to know that you've been lying to this family for weeks, maybe months," he said. "Long enough to know that you've been sneaking around with Edmund Blackwood's daughter, while Dad trusts you to run this ranch and protect our interests. How could you do this, Jake? How could you betray everything we stand for?" The accusation stung because Jake had been asking himself the same questions for weeks, wrestling with the guilt of deceiving his family while being unable to give up the love that had become the most important thing in his life. "You don't understand," Jake said, stepping closer to his brother, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This isn't about betrayal or family loyalty. This is about two people who found something real and honest in the middle of all this artificial hatred." Tommy laughed bitterly. "Artificial," he repeated. "Tell that to Dad when he finds out. Tell that to the ranch hands who look up to you. Tell that to everyone in the county who's going to hear about this eventually, because secrets like this don't stay hidden forever." The threat was implicit but clear, and Jake felt the walls of his carefully constructed secret life beginning to crumble around him. "What do you want, Tommy?" he asked wearily, recognizing the calculating look in his brother's eyes, and knowing that this confrontation was about more than family loyalty or moral outrage. Tommy's demand was simpler and more complicated than Jake had expected. Rather than asking for money or favors, Tommy wanted something that Jake wasn't sure he could give: respect, recognition, and a genuine partnership in running the ranch. "I'm tired of being the spare son," Tommy said, his voice raw with years of accumulated resentment. "I'm tired of Dad treating me like I'm incompetent while you get all the responsibility and all the credit. I want a real role in this operation, Jake. I want Dad to see me as more than just your backup plan." The conversation that followed was painful and revelatory, forcing both brothers to confront years of unspoken competition and misunderstanding. Jake realized that he had been so focused on living up to their father's expectations and maintaining the family's reputation that he had never really seen Tommy's struggles or appreciated his younger brother's desire to contribute meaningfully to the ranch's success. Tommy, for his part, began to understand that Jake's position as heir apparent came with pressures and responsibilities that weren't always enviable, and that his brother's recent secretive behavior stemmed from genuine love rather than casual rebellion. After hours of argument, negotiation, and grudging honesty, the brothers reached an uneasy agreement. Tommy would keep Jake's secret, at least temporarily, while Jake worked to convince their father to give Tommy more responsibility and recognition within the ranch operation. It wasn't a perfect solution, and both brothers knew that the underlying issues between them would require time and effort to fully resolve, but it was a start towards something resembling partnership rather than competition. However, Tommy's silence came with a deadline that made Jake's blood run cold. "You have 1 week," Tommy said as they shook hands on their agreement. "1 week to either end things with Victoria Blackwood or tell Dad yourself. Because if you don't handle this situation by next Friday, I will. And if I have to be the one to break this news to our father, I won't be gentle about it." The ultimatum hung over Jake like a storm cloud, making every moment with Victoria feel precious and potentially final. When he told her about Tommy's discovery and the deadline they were facing, Victoria's reaction surprised him with its calm determination. "Then we tell them," she said simply, as if the solution were obvious. "We tell both our fathers the truth, and we deal with whatever comes next together." But Jake knew it wouldn't be that simple. The confrontation with his father was likely to be explosive, filled with accusations of betrayal and demands that Jake choose between his family and his love for Victoria. Edmund Blackwood's reaction was equally unpredictable. He might see his daughter's relationship with a Thornton as the ultimate betrayal of family loyalty, or he might view it as an opportunity to gain some advantage in the ongoing feud. The variables were too numerous and the potential for disaster too great for Jake to feel anything approaching confidence about voluntary confession. As the week progressed, Jake found himself paralyzed by indecision and dread. His work on the ranch suffered as he struggled to concentrate on routine tasks, while his mind raced through possible scenarios and outcomes. The ranch hands noticed his distraction, but attributed it to stress or personal problems, never suspecting that their respected foreman was grappling with a secret that could destroy the very foundations of everything they all worked to maintain. Victoria, meanwhile, was dealing with her own family pressures. Edmund Blackwood had announced his intention to expand their operation by purchasing additional land, possibly including some of the parcels that bordered Thornton property. The announcement came during a family dinner where Victoria was expected to contribute her business expertise to the planning process, but she found herself unable to focus on financial projections and acquisition strategies while her personal life teetered on the edge of disaster. The irony wasn't lost on her. that her father was planning moves that would likely increase tensions with the Thorntons at the exact moment when she was hoping to bridge the gap between the families. On Thursday evening, with less than 24 hours remaining before Tommy's deadline, Jake and Victoria met at their usual place by Willow Creek for what might be their final secret rendezvous. The conversation was painful and desperate, filled with expressions of love and promises that might prove impossible to keep. They talked about running away together, leaving Texas and their families behind to start fresh somewhere else, but both knew that abandoning the land and the life they loved was not a real solution to their problem. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Victoria said as they prepared to part, "I want you to know that loving you has been worth every moment of uncertainty and fear. If our families can't accept what we have, then that's their loss, not ours." Jake held her close, breathing in her scent and memorizing the feel of her in his arms, knowing that after tomorrow everything would change. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does, that will never change." For Xiaomin, they kissed goodbye with the passion and desperation of lovers who might never see each other again, and then they rode away in opposite directions, each preparing for a confrontation that would determine not just the future of their relationship, but the future of their families as well. That night, Jake sat on the porch of the ranch house, staring up at the star-filled sky and trying to find the courage to face his father with the truth. Tomorrow would bring either the beginning of a new chapter in the Thornton-Blackwood saga or the end of everything he had dared to hope for. The only certainty was that the comfortable lies and careful deceptions that had sustained him for months were about to come crashing down, and nothing would ever be the same again. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually filled Jake with energy and optimism about the day ahead. But as he stood in the kitchen drinking coffee and watching his father read the newspaper at the breakfast table, Jake felt nothing but a crushing weight of dread and anticipation. Samuel Thornton looked every bit the successful rancher that he was, weathered by decades of Texas sun and wind, but still strong and commanding at 62. His gray hair was neatly combed, his clothes pressed and practical, and his demeanor projected the confident authority of a man who had built something lasting and valuable through hard work and determination. Looking at his father, Jake was struck by how much the older man had sacrificed to build and maintain the ranch, and how devastating this revelation was going to be for someone who had always valued family loyalty above everything else. "Dad," Jake said, his voice rougher than he intended, "we need to talk about something important." Samuel looked up from his newspaper, immediately sensing the gravity in his son's tone. In 28 years, Jake had never approached his father with anything but straightforward honesty and respect, and the current tension in his voice was so unlike him that Samuel felt his stomach tighten with foreboding. "What's on your mind, son?" Samuel asked, folding the newspaper and giving Jake his full attention. The kitchen fell silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock and the distant sounds of ranch life beginning outside. Sounds that suddenly seemed very far away to Jake as he prepared to speak words that would change everything. "I've been seeing someone," Jake began, then immediately wished he had chosen different words, something that would have eased into the revelation more gradually. "Someone I probably shouldn't be seeing, someone you're not going to be happy about." Samuel's expression shifted from concern to confusion to growing alarm as he processed his son's words. In his mind, he ran through the possible complications. A married woman, perhaps, or someone from a family with a bad reputation in the community. But nothing in his imagination prepared him for what Jake said next. "It's Victoria Blackwood, Dad. I've been seeing Edmund's daughter for the past 3 months, and I'm in love with her." The words hung in the air between them like an unexploded bomb, and Jake watched his father's face cycle through disbelief, shock, anger, and what might have been grief. Samuel stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor, and for a moment, Jake thought his father might actually strike him. Instead, Samuel walked to the window and stared out at the land that had consumed his life, his shoulders rigid with tension and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "How?" Samuel asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to our family? To everything we've worked for? To the memory of your grandfather who died still fighting Edmund Blackwood over that bastard's attempts to steal our water? The pain in his father's voice cut through Jake like a knife, but he forced himself to continue with the explanation he had rehearsed, but never quite believed he would have to give. He told Samuel about that first meeting by Willow Creek, about the conversations that had revealed Victoria to be nothing like the enemy they had imagined, and about the love that had grown between them, despite every reason why it should have been impossible. He spoke about Victoria's intelligence and integrity, her genuine love for ranching, and her belief that the feud between their families was a destructive waste of energy that served no one's interests. Throughout Jake's explanation, Samuel remained motionless at the window, his silence more ominous than any explosion of anger would have been. When Jake finished speaking, the kitchen fell quiet again, except for the relentless ticking of the clock, each second stretching into eternity as Jake waited for his father's response. Finally, Samuel turned around, and Jake was shocked to see tears in his father's eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of rage and betrayal that made his weathered face look ancient and broken. "Get out," Samuel said quietly. "Get out of this house and off this land. You're no son of mine." The words hit Jake like physical blows, even though he had expected something like this reaction. "Dad, please," Jake began, but Samuel cut him off with a gesture that was final and absolute. "I said get out," Samuel repeated, his voice growing stronger and more commanding. "I won't have a traitor living under my roof or working my land. You've made your choice, Jake. You chose her over your family, over your heritage, over everything that should have mattered to you. Now live with the consequences." Jake stood frozen in the kitchen, watching his father's face and seeing nothing there but implacable anger and disappointment. This was not the conversation he had hoped for, not the possibility of understanding or eventual acceptance that he had secretly harbored. This was complete rejection, the severing of bonds that he had thought were unbreakable. Without another word, Jake turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house that had been his home for 28 years, and toward an uncertain future that suddenly seemed both terrifying and liberating. He packed his belongings quickly and efficiently, taking only what he could carry on horseback and leaving behind the accumulated possessions of a lifetime. As he loaded his saddlebags and prepared Thunder for travel, Jake could see ranch hands watching from a distance, their faces reflecting confusion and concern about the obvious tension surrounding their foreman's sudden departure. Word would spread quickly through the local ranching community that Jake Thornton had been disowned by his father, though the reasons would remain speculation until someone learned the truth and the gossip mill began its inevitable work. Jake's last stop before leaving Thornton land was at Tommy's quarters in the bunkhouse, where he found his brother waiting with the expression that mixed satisfaction with unexpected regret. "I heard," Tommy said simply. The whole house heard, actually. Dad's yelling carried pretty well. Jake studied his brother's face, looking for signs of the triumph he had expected to see, but finding instead something that looked almost like sympathy. "Are you happy now?" Jake asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity about Tommy's feelings now that his ultimatum had been fulfilled. Tommy was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I thought I would be," he admitted, "but watching Dad throw you out like that, hearing him disown you, it doesn't feel like winning. It just feels like our family is broken now, maybe permanently." The conversation that followed was brief but important, with both brothers acknowledging that their relationship would need to be rebuilt from the ground up if they were ever going to move past the events of recent weeks. Tommy promised to take care of their father and the ranch, while Jake prepared to face an uncertain future that might or might not include Victoria, depending on how her own family reacted to the news of their relationship. As Jake rode away from the only home he had ever known, he carried with him the hope that love might ultimately prove stronger than hatred, and that the story he and Victoria were writing together might have a happier ending than the tragic beginning it had been given.